They didn't ask me to sell the ranch, they told me. Not politely, not reasonably. Their offer wasn't just low, it was flat out insulting. A transparent attempt to strong-arm me off land that had been in my family for over 100 years. What they didn't know, what they couldn't begin to grasp from their pastel world of synchronized mailboxes and obsessively trimmed hedges, was that their entire polished little neighborhood was, in a very real and legal sense, already mine. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from, because what unfolded next, layered with forgotten deeds, historical quirks, and some truly exquisite karma, was the kind of story that proves sometimes the biggest bullies are standing on the shakiest ground. I still can't quite believe I pulled it off, going from being nearly forced out to owning the HOA that tried to erase me. But like most hostile takeovers, it all started with a letter. A letter pretending to be polite. I've lived on Oak Haven Ranch my whole life, minus a few years in the city working as a forensic accountant. That skill set would prove unexpectedly lethal. The ranch wasn't just property, it was legacy. It was my grandfather teaching me to ride, summer nights under skies littered with stars, the hush of the creek snaking along the western edge like a whispered secret. Pressed up against my southern boundary was Whispering Pines Estates, a gated HOA development barely 2 decades old, carved from what used to be old hemlock's grazing pasture. I kept to myself. Fixed fences. Waved when waved to. Their idea of community seemed to involve perfectly matching outdoor furniture and an aggressive allergy to authenticity. Then came the letter. Heavy cardstock. HOA letterhead featuring 2 anemic pine trees whispering. From Brenda Milligan, HOA president. A woman whose demeanor radiated Karen energy at a frequency that could knock out birds mid-flight. The letter used buzzwords like aesthetic cohesion and community harmony, phrases that always translate to, "We want you gone." It ended with a vague offer to discuss acquisition at fair market value, which naturally they would determine. I laughed, tossed it in the circular file, and went back to work. Their version of charm involved photos stressed with signs that said, "Live, laugh, love." Mine involved mud, cattle, and the smell of clean manure. 1 week later, Brenda herself showed up at my gate. White Escalade. Spotless. The kind of SUV that screams, "I demand to speak to the zoning commission." She stepped out dressed in tactical yoga wear, the kind that costs more than a month of feed, and smiled like someone trying not to inhale through her nose. "Mr. Caldwell," she beamed. "We sent a letter." "I got it," I said, keeping it neutral. "I've got a long fuse, but condescension wrapped in liquor burns quick." "Wonderful," she chirped. "We were hoping to discuss our generous offer. You see, the community feels your ranch, while charming, is no longer synergistic with the upscale residential nature of Whispering Pines." She offered $200,000. I nearly laughed out loud. 200 grand for 300 acres of rolling pasture, forest, water rights, structures, and generational history. My barns were worth more than that. "Miss Milligan," I said calmly, "that offer's not just low, it's imaginative. The ranch isn't for sale. Certainly not at that price." Her smile cracked like a cheap veneer. "Mr. Caldwell, perhaps you don't understand. Your property's presence is becoming problematic. The noise, the animals, the smells." "Smells like work and rain," I replied. "And that fence you're talking about? I rebuilt it myself last spring." "We believe our offer is fair," she snapped, all sweetness gone. "We have bylaws, you know." "I know your bylaws," I said. "They apply inside Whispering Pines. Not out here. This land is mine. Always has been. And it'll stay that way." She peeled off in that spotless SUV, throwing gravel in a tantrum. I watched her go, then went inside and dug into my grandfather's files. He used to say, "Know your land, son. Know its lines. Know its story. Someday it'll be the difference between keeping it and losing it." Turns out he was right. First came the complaints. Anonymous reports to the county about runoff and waste, baseless. My creek flows away from Whispering Pines. Dale, the county inspector and family friend, came out, took one look and sighed. "Another one, huh?" Then the letters. More of that expensive cardstock. Complaints about visual blight. Wildflowers mostly. Queen Anne's lace. Black-eyed Susans. Apparently those offended the delicate lawn sensibilities of Brenda's beige army. I started a new file, HOA shenanigans. Photographs. Timestamps. Every scrap of paper. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. And I had spreadsheets and court records for weapons. Then came the day I found a stranger near the old oak tree. Surveyor's gear. Trespassing. I approached calmly, camera already rolling. "You lost?" I asked. The man looked nervous. "I was told to check boundary lines." "By who?" He swallowed. "The HOA. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a nuisance battle. This was a full siege. And they had no idea the land they were standing on was about to rise up and bite them." That he looked flustered the moment I approached. "Ma'am, Mr. Caldwell, right?" he stammered. "Brenda Milligan hired me to survey the boundary. She said there was a dispute." "There's no dispute," I said evenly, though my blood was already starting to boil. "This is my land and you're trespassing. The boundary is clearly marked. See that fence? Been standing for 60 years. The surveyor, barely out of college by the looks of him, mumbled an apology and started packing up. I wasn't mad at him. He was just trying to do his job. But I made sure to get his card and note the company he worked for. Brenda was escalating, trying to fabricate a boundary conflict to nibble away at my acreage. It was brazen. It was insulting. And it was just the beginning. The offers kept coming, each a little higher than the last, like she thought I was a fish circling the bait. $250,000. Then $300,000, delivered with a theatrical sigh like she was draining her own retirement fund to pay for it. "This is our final offer, Mr. Caldwell," she declared during yet another uninvited appearance at my gate, her Escalade purring behind her like a getaway car. "Take it or we'll have to explore other avenues to protect our community's interests." I leaned against the gatepost, arms crossed. "Other avenues? What's next, Miss Milligan? You planning a hostile takeover using Petunia regulations?" Her lips thinned. She didn't like sarcasm, especially when it hit too close to the absurd truth. "There are ways," she said vaguely. "Legal ways. Sometimes progress requires difficult decisions." She was bluffing. I knew that. But the strategy was clear: wear me down with pressure until I folded. What she didn't count on was that I wasn't just emotionally tied to this land. I had the paperwork to prove it was mine, in ways she couldn't even imagine. Each night, after feeding the livestock and making sure the fences were sound, I'd sit at my grandfather's old oak desk and pore over decades of ledgers, maps, deeds, and notes. He'd always said, "Know your land, son. Know every inch of it, every paper tied to it. Someday it'll matter more than you think." Turns out he was right. In a thick, leather-bound volume labeled simply Land Leases, I found it. A 99-year ground lease signed exactly 25 years ago, between my grandfather and a company called Pioneer Valley Homes Incorporated. The description of the leased property matched Whispering Pines down to the square foot. I cross-referenced parcel numbers and boundary descriptions. My pulse spiked. They didn't own the land. They'd built their homes on it, maintained it, paved their cul-de-sacs over it. But the ground itself? That still belonged to my family. And the lease wasn't just legally sound, it was packed with protective clauses. Ones that prohibited any nuisance or interference with the retained estate, Oak Haven Ranch. In layman's terms, the HOA had no right to harass me. Doing so could trigger breach clauses that would make their lives very complicated. Brenda wasn't just being a nuisance. She was violating the very lease agreement that allowed her HOA to exist. And from the way she was acting, she didn't have a clue. My grandfather hadn't just left me land, he'd left me a legal trap, baited and buried for decades, waiting for someone arrogant enough to walk right into it. The next few weeks I kept quiet and let Brenda keep digging. I consulted with a lawyer, Arthur Jenkins, a semi-retired property law veteran with a wit dry enough to cause drought. His office smelled like old books and dust, and he listened patiently as I laid out the story, from the lowball offers to the harassment to the golden goose, the lease. When I finished, he leaned back and gave a long, low whistle. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, a grin forming under his mustache, Your grandfather was either a prophet or the luckiest bastard this side of the Rockies. This lease? It's an ironclad noose, and Miss Milligan just stuck her head in it. He flipped through the document with glee, chuckling at clauses like, conduct unbecoming of a good-faith tenant, and prohibited harassment of the dominant estate. Every letter Brenda had sent, every surveyor she'd hired, every baseless complaint, it all worked in our favor. Arthur's advice was simple: stay silent. Let her dig. Let her escalate. The more unreasonable her behavior, the stronger our position when the time came to act. So I kept documenting. Every letter. Every anonymous complaint. Every visit. Then came the landscaping incident. The HOA's preferred contractor accidentally sprayed herbicide along my fence line, killing the heirloom rose bushes my grandmother planted 50 years ago. When I asked the workers why, one of them shrugged and said, "Ms. Milligan told us to clear it, said it was blocking visibility." Visibility of what? My compost pile? Then came the anonymous tip to animal control claiming my cattle were malnourished. Bessie, my pampered prize-winning Hereford, probably eats better than Brenda does. The inspector left shaking his head, muttering about wasted time. Each petty attack added another page to Arthur's file. And Brenda? She thought my silence meant weakness. She was about to find out otherwise. Brenda mistook my silence and steady refusals for weakness, and that only made her bolder. The HOA upped their offer again, this time to $350,000, sent by certified mail in an envelope so overstuffed with arrogance it practically groaned. The letter inside was saturated with condescension. It declared in no uncertain terms that this was their final irrevocable offer, and warned that if I didn't accept within 30 days, the HOA would be forced to pursue all available legal remedies to resolve this untenable situation for the betterment of the Whispering Pines community. The audacity was almost impressive, if it weren't so wildly out of touch with reality. They were threatening legal action against me for the crime of living peacefully on my own land, while very likely breaching the same lease that allowed their homes to exist in the first place. Arthur Jenkins and I got a good laugh out of it. All available legal remedies, Arthur mused, leafing through the letter with amused disdain. I wonder if that includes discovering they've been tenants for 25 years and have been behaving like a pack of entitled delinquents. Meanwhile, I began discreetly speaking with some of the Whispering Pines residents I knew weren't completely lost to the Brenda cult. My friend Sarah, for instance. I didn't reveal the full extent of my leverage yet, I wanted the right moment for that, but I did share my frustration over the harassment. She was horrified. At the last HOA meeting, she said, Brenda told everyone you were being unreasonable. That you were blocking a generous offer to beautify the community entrance. She made it sound like you were running a junkyard. I laughed bitterly. Brenda had clearly been hard at work crafting her narrative, me, the stubborn, antisocial rancher, standing in the way of progress and property values. And many of her supporters, what I had begun calling the Beige Brigade, lapped it up. They genuinely believed my ranch, with its oak trees, horses, and heritage, was a blight on their suburban utopia. But not everyone bought it. Whispers of Brenda's overreach had started spreading. A few residents began slipping anonymous notes into my mailbox. Small apologies, quiet support, even gratitude. These were the silent dissenters. The ones too wary to speak up, but clearly uncomfortable with the HOA's bullying. Brenda, of course, remained oblivious. She interpreted my quiet resolve and refusal to bite as signs that I was on the verge of giving in. She had no idea that my background in forensic accounting had trained me to detect patterns and paper trails, and that my grandfather's foresight had planted a landmine right beneath her HOA throne. As the 30-day deadline approached, Arthur and I prepared our response. It wouldn't be a yes. It wouldn't be a no. It would be a lesson. A very expensive, very public one. Her own aggressive tactics were about to hand me the keys to her kingdom, or rather remind her that I'd held them the entire time. We timed it precisely. The deadline passed and I said nothing. Sarah called 2 days later, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper. She's freaking out, she said. Called an emergency HOA meeting. She's telling everyone you're playing games. that the HOA needs to take legal action now to compel the sale. She's even roped in some lawyers she knows from her tennis club. There was a pause. She's talking about eminent domain or something, community improvement acquisition? It all sounds like garbage, but she's convincing when she's riled up. Perfect. Brenda was about to set the stage for her own unmasking, and she didn't even know it. Arthur practically clapped his hands with glee when I told him. A public forum? He said, eyebrows raised. Oh, Mr. Caldwell. This is better than I could have dreamed. Her own stage. Her own audience. And she walks right into it. Glorious. The meeting was set for Wednesday night at the Whispering Pines Community Clubhouse, a sterile building in a sea of identical homes, as aggressively beige as the rules that govern them. Arthur and I waited until 10 minutes after the meeting started to make our entrance. By the time we arrived, Brenda had worked herself into a righteous frenzy, red pantsuit blazing, lectern trembling beneath her furious gesticulations. And this stubborn refusal to even acknowledge our generous offer, she spat, an offer significantly above what that dilapidated property is actually worth, is an insult, not just to this board but to every homeowner in Whispering Pines. A low rumble of agreement passed through the crowd, about 50 people by my count. Some looked angry. Others just bored. But a few, Sarah among them, looked distinctly uneasy. Brenda paused, letting the silence hang in the air like a courtroom verdict. That's when she saw us. Arthur and I stood in the back, calm, unhurried, dressed not for drama but for business. Brenda's eyes locked onto mine. Her triumphant smirk said it all. You're too late. I've won. She had no idea that the real show had just begun. Finally decided to join us? Brenda Milligan called out, her voice shrill with performative triumph. Here to tender your acceptance of our offer, or just wanted to witness this community unanimously vote to pursue legal action against your nuisance property? I let the moment hang, then replied evenly, actually, Ms. Milligan, we're here to address a critical oversight in your assessment of this situation, specifically regarding property rights and long-standing contractual obligations. Arthur Jenkins stepped forward beside me, exuding quiet authority in his tailored jacket and polished demeanor. He held a leather briefcase like it was a scalpel. Brenda's smirk faltered. Oversight, she said, the word catching like a burr. Mr. Caldwell, the only oversight here is your failure to understand inevitability. Whispering Pines will not be held hostage by your pastoral fantasy. My pastoral fantasy, I said, voice calm but with an edge of iron, is situated entirely on land I own. Your Whispering Pines estates, however, I paused, watching the anticipation tighten the air. That's a bit more complicated. Arthur took it from there. Good evening, he said, voice clear and clipped. I'm Arthur Jenkins, legal counsel for Mr. Caldwell and the Caldwell Family Trust. We're here tonight to present information that we believe is of immediate and vital importance to every homeowner present. He opened the briefcase and began handing out bound packets to the front row. Please pass these back. Brenda's expression twisted from irritation to uncertainty, then to pale, dawning panic as she caught sight of the title page. Notification of lease terms and potential breaches. Ground lease agreement dated June 14, 1978 between Caldwell Agricultural Holdings and Pioneer Valley Homes Incorporated. She snatched a copy from the hands of a stunned HOA board member. Her eyes scanned the first page like she could will it to say something different. This is ridiculous, she sputtered, her voice cracking. This can't be real. It's nonsense. It's quite real, Arthur replied, his tone polite but unsparing. This is a legally binding 99-year ground lease entered into by Mr. Caldwell's grandfather and the original developers of Whispering Pines. The land your homes, and this clubhouse, are built on belongs to the Caldwell Family Trust. You, the homeowners, are essentially subtenants under that master lease. A collective gasp rippled through the room. But we own our homes, a man shouted from the middle of the crowd. You own the structures, sir, Arthur clarified. Not the ground beneath them. That land is leased. A common but often overlooked detail, especially if not disclosed properly over years of resales. I stepped forward. And that lease contains specific clauses, I said, about nuisance, interference with adjacent retained property, and maintaining a cooperative relationship with the lessor, me. Ms. Milligan, acting as your HOA president, has spent months violating those terms. I gestured toward the second half of the document packet. You'll find a log of her actions: frivolous code complaints, attempted trespasses, harassing correspondence, and insultingly low purchase offers. These, in legal terms, constitute substantial breaches. Brenda stood frozen, eyes darting between the papers and the suddenly unreadable faces of her audience. The sharp crimson of her power pantsuit now seemed garish against her ashen face. The lawyer she'd bragged about never showed. The mood in the room had shifted entirely. The crowd, once whipped into a frenzy, was now subdued, dazed. Her beige brigade sat silent, lips pressed white, realizing their queen had marched them into disaster. Arthur let the silence breathe, then said, "Given the gravity of these breaches, the Caldwell Family Trust is reviewing all remedies afforded under the lease. These include, but are not limited to, claims for damages, immediate cessation of interfering activities, and in the event of continued non-compliance or bad faith, potential early termination of the lease." The last line dropped like a guillotine. Termination. The word echoed in the hush like a bell toll. If that lease was terminated, if the trust chose not to renew, ownership of the land and everything on it could revert back. The homes, the park, the roads, even this clubhouse. All of it. You can't do that," Brenda finally gasped, voice strained and thin. "Oh, I assure you we can," Arthur replied, his politeness now laced with steel. "Your grandfather left you quite a legacy, Mr. Caldwell. He saw this coming. He planned for it." Brenda looked like someone had pulled the plug on her. All the force, the fury, the certainty, gone. The room, moments ago brimming with smug condemnation, had turned on its axis. Residents clutched their documents, whispering, exchanging glances that ranged from confusion to panic. Questions erupted. But not the accusatory kind. These were desperate. What does this mean for our homes? Are we being evicted? How was this never disclosed? What happens now? Arthur raised a calming hand. "Mr. Caldwell has no intention of evicting anyone," he said. "His only desire is to live peacefully and without harassment. Unfortunately, the actions of your HOA president have forced this matter to a legal head. There are remedies available, negotiated and reasonable ones, but the situation is now urgent and very real." And just like that, the tide turned. I wasn't the pariah anymore. Brenda was. She had tried to paint me as a nuisance, tried to push me out with pressure and paperwork. But in the end, she was the intruder, and she was standing on borrowed ground. The mood in the room shifted sharply, no longer supportive but accusatory. Murmurs turned to pointed questions. "You knew about this, Brenda?" someone shouted. "Did you know and not tell us? Were you putting our homes at risk?" Brenda, still pale as plaster, stammered, I may have seen some old paperwork, but I thought it was irrelevant. Just a historical footnote. This is a modern development." "A modern development," Arthur interjected smoothly, "built on a very old and still very binding agreement, Miss Milligan. Ignorance of the lease, or willful disregard, does not void its validity. That HOA meeting didn't end with a bang. It ended with the rustle of legal documents and the horrified silence of a room full of betrayed homeowners. Brenda Milligan's reign of performative control imploded that night. Within a week, she resigned as HOA president. The once mighty white Escalade, her symbol of suburban dominance, sat parked like a defeated general's steed, eventually sporting a forlorn for sale sign. Word spread that she and her husband were leaving, presumably before the full financial consequences of her recklessness caught up with them. Homeowners were already whispering about personal liability. There were talks of misrepresentation. Her retreat was quiet, embarrassed, and utterly unceremonious. The new HOA board, hastily assembled and thoroughly chastened, approached Arthur and me with a very different energy. Gone was the arrogance and entitlement. In their place, humility, urgency, and a sincere desire to make amends. Their new legal counsel, a composed and competent woman named Ms. Albright, was clearly horrified, not only by Brenda's mismanagement but by the way she had completely misled her supposed legal advisor. She conceded point after point with little resistance. The negotiations that followed weren't about buying my land, they were about earning the right to stay on it. We never intended to terminate the lease. That had always been the nuclear option, terrifying leverage, not a goal. My family weren't developers. We were ranchers. We wanted peace, not petty empire building. Still, the future of Whispering Pines would now look very different. First, the HOA issued a formal, public apology. It was published in their newsletter and read aloud at a special meeting. Second, we established a significantly increased annual ground rent, finally reflective of the land's true value. That payment, now baked into their yearly budget, became both a revenue stream and a quiet reminder of whose ground they walked on. I chose to invest the funds back into Oak Haven, restoring buildings, expanding pastures, and setting up a scholarship fund for local agricultural students. Third, new covenants were added to the lease, prohibiting any HOA policies or resident behavior that interfered with the operations or peaceful enjoyment of Oak Haven Ranch. I was also granted a permanent, non-voting advisory seat on the HOA board, ensuring the landowner always had a voice in community decisions. My rustic charm had become a protected feature. The fence line between the ranch and Whispering Pines, once a silent battlefield, transformed into a symbol of mutual respect. The herbicide-damaged roses were replaced at the HOA's expense, with even more vibrant heirloom varieties. My wildflowers? Left to grow freely. The sounds and smells of a working ranch were no longer cause for complaint. They were part of the local character Whispering Pines now paid handsomely to be adjacent to. My friend Sarah was elected to the new HOA board. She told me the mood in the neighborhood had shifted. Without Brenda's iron grip, residents became more relaxed, less obsessed with uniformity and appearances. The community, it turned out, was capable of being neighborly once the fearmongering stopped. Life on Oak Haven Ranch returned to its natural rhythm. Sunrise chores, quiet evenings, the scent of earth and livestock in the air. But now that rhythm beat under the banner of certainty. My grandfather's meticulous record-keeping and quiet wisdom hadn't just saved the ranch. It had flipped a hostile takeover into a revenue stream, and forced a once arrogant HOA to evolve into something tolerable. There's a lesson in all this. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Especially if they know their land, know their contracts, and have a background in forensic accounting. Because the truth, like water, always finds its level. And sometimes it washes away the arrogant, the misinformed, and the ones who confuse title deeds with power. And that, folks, is how I went from being the target of an HOA land grab to becoming their de facto landlord. All thanks to a forgotten 99-year lease and a president who believed her own hype a little too much. What's the wildest power trip you've ever seen from someone in a tiny position of authority? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more stories where the underdog wins, not with noise but with receipts. Thanks for watching.